think it's safe to say that the church in West Virginia has had a really tough year. Everything from excessive spending, credible allegations of sexual harassment of young priests, alleged kickbacks and overpayment of doctors at Wheeling Hospital, now has the hospital, and thus its owner, the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston, subject of a federal lawsuit from the U.S. Attorney in Pittsburgh, closing of diocesan schools. All of these things happened during former Bishop Michael Bransfield's 13-year tenure in West Virginia. In your opinion, what is Bishop Bransfield's legacy in West Virginia? You've been there for about 10 months. What do you see as his legacy in West Virginia?
You mentioned a lot of very difficult things that happened under his tenure during his time as Bishop of Wheeling-Charleston. Those are difficult things, and those things, unfortunately, will be a part of his legacy. I would like to make a distinction, though, between the things that pertain to his own personal comportment and style as a bishop, which pertain to him personally, as opposed to the things that the bishop faced in trying to administer the diocese. And so with regard to his own person, the things that are roiling us all now are indeed the overspending, his own personal behavior, the lack of controls, and those kinds of things are very troubling to people. And those are things we hope the new bishop will address. But there's other things that every bishop has to worry about, and one of them is sustaining Catholic schools when the enrollment goes down. I think if administering a hospital in this day and age is a very challenging business for anyone. While there is a lawsuit underway, I might mention that we have new management at the hospital.
Sure.
I might also mention that it's a really great hospital. And it didn't get that way accidentally. It's really a good hospital because there's been a lot of care and attention to it, and it's a major employer in Wheeling. So the bishop, like every bishop, he had to face some challenges. Like every bishop, he did some very good things in the diocese, but unfortunately, I think the things that showed energy and vision have been, in some sense, really undermined by issues of personal behavior, and that's most regrettable.
The legacy he leaves behind, and when we talk about the spending and the sexual harassment allegations, and we'll just focus on those in particular because those are what's in the news right now, and what prompted you to now oversee the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston as the apostolic administrator. What was the damage done to the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston and the faithful in West Virginia by these actions that are now coming to light?
Let me first speak to the harassment allegations. I think that I think about what the effect that has, the very direct effect it has in the people who are the objects of that kind of behavior. I think that when I learned of this firsthand, it really kind of broke my heart. It really does a lot of damage to people in a deep and personal way. And as a bishop, as one who loves my own priests and seminarians, I would just never want to see that happen.
And to be clear, this was,
to everybody.
generally speaking, sexual harassment of younger priests.
sexual harassment of younger priests and some seminarians. And so my heart broke for them. It's deeply disturbing. And one of the things that has to happen there is a healing not only for these individuals, but for the whole presbyterate, because when some of our number are affected, all of us are affected. And secondly, the reports of excessive spending in a state that has many economic challenges and social challenges are deeply disturbing. And I think that it's so understandable that people living in all parts of West Virginia would be disturbed by this. My worry, whether it's sexual harassment or whether it's the overspending, is the effect that it has on people's lives of faith. It's not the bishop who controls the church. He is but the Lord's instrument. It's not the priest. We are the Lord's instruments. We are, as St. Paul says, earthen vessels. Nonetheless, when any one of us departs from standards of conduct that are appropriate to our way of life and to our responsibilities, it can undermine the faith and goodwill of people. And I, as a bishop, as a shepherd, I worry about that. What breaks my heart is I can't be there enough to be the one to really help restore this. But that's the work that has to be done, in my view.
So let's just jump right into that. Is you've mentioned some of your thoughts in a video you put out to the faithful a few weeks back.
Mm-hmm.
Explain how, in your opinion, the healing begins for the Church in West Virginia.
I think the healing has begun in some sense. It's hard to see when you take the first steps. It's hard to know what the ultimate outcome is going to be, but by doing things like putting out the names of priests who have offended, by putting in a third-party reporting system, by doubling the size of the Finance Council and bringing in people with additional expertise, meeting with them monthly, by also doubling the size of the review board for sexual misconduct, having them meet more often, by putting back into place some of the policies and procedures that had been overridden. Those are not glamorous steps, and most people don't pay a lot of attention to them. But those are steps toward healing. They're sort of like doing the groundwork. It's sort of when you're going to build a building, you got to do site work. I'm sort of doing site work. I don't expect a bit of credit for it, any more than the contractor does who comes and removes the rocks so you can build a beautiful building. But what I see my responsibility is working with really good people, and there are a lot of really good people, to begin to do the groundwork so that when a new bishop comes in, he can be a shepherd who, as the Pope says, has the smell of the sheep, loves people. Part of it is just going out and being present. It's being there, visiting parishes, getting to know people, listening to people, hearing their stories, taking them to heart, and then attracting to himself. We bishops are not magicians. We are not dictators. We are shepherds. But what we need to do is to gather and attract to ourselves good co-workers, a good team. That includes clergy, of course, but it also includes good lay co-workers. And I'm seeing a lot of them who are willing generously to step forward in West Virginia to do that. Healing has got to be led by the shepherd, by the bishop. But for it to really take effect, it involves everybody in the local church. And I'm praying you're going to get just exactly that kind of a bishop.
Okay. Since you've been in your role in West Virginia as the apostolic administrator, it's been about 10 months now. As you mentioned, you've overseen two major initiatives that many believe are important for the church to move forward. One obviously is the investigation into Bishop Bransfield, and the other, the public release of priests credibly abused and sexually abused children. Let's talk just for a minute about the priest list. Why did you authorize the list to be compiled, and once it was finished, why did you choose to release it to the public?
That's a very important question you ask, and I'm glad you did, because I think in my own history in this very sad aspect of the church's life, I've always felt it's important to get the names out there. So when I was in the Diocese of Bridgeport, early on, I did it. When I came to Baltimore, I found we were the second diocese in the United States to have done it. We did it in 2003, I believe. And you do that because when you put the list out there, number one, you've been honest. And I think we owe the people of God that level of honesty. Number two, there might be somebody out there who says, gosh, I was harmed by this priest or that, but maybe I'm the only one. When they see the name on the list, they get the courage often to come forward. And when they come forward, what we want to provide for them is the help, the counseling they need to be able to, and the pastoral help. One of the things I'm doing is selling the former bishop's residence and taking the money from those proceeds so that there will be funds to provide pastoral assistance for those who have been harmed. I think that's why I think that's important to do. And we do it here in Baltimore. We're a much more complex place ecclesiastically, so we've made sure to update our list through the years, including with the recent revelations from Pennsylvania. We asked ourselves, who on that list served in Baltimore? We found some names, we put them on our website. Not only the names, but also the information about where they served, when they served, so that anyone looking at it can say, if that happened to me, I can and should make a report. You asked me a second part, and I'm forgetting it.
Well, first I think was why the list was compiled and then released to the public. I think you answered the question fairly well. Do you just quickly, but do you feel the mechanisms that you put in place in West Virginia, and I believe the list has already been updated once since the initial release, is there a process in place now so that as additional names may be discovered, they will be added and made public?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is there's got to be an easy way to make a report. And so putting in the third-party reporting system, such as we have in Baltimore, using, I think, Ethics Point, has been, I think, is an important step. People might hesitate to tell their parish priest. They might hesitate to call the chancery office. But if it's a third-party reporting system, it gets a little bit easier. And we take every call on that line with utmost seriousness. Second thing is to ensure people who do come forward that they're going not only get a good hearing, but a compassionate hearing. And that this isn't just being handled by the chancery staff. So what we've done is to have strengthened the independent lay review board, that we review every decision in every case that comes forward. So what we're trying to do is create confidence that if you make a report, it'll be taken seriously. The other thing that the diocese has done for years, for many years, is to create a safe environment. And so the training, the background checks, A lot of people will say, I never did this. Why do I have to be background checked in order to, let's say, teach in a Catholic school? The answer is we're creating a culture in which sexual abuse and harm to the vulnerable isn't tolerated. A lot of people in the church know how to spot it, and they know what to do once they've spotted it. The other thing I'll mention that should be of some comfort is complete cooperation on these matters with the civil authorities. So, for example, we would never investigate these matters until we get the green light from so they do their investigation first. Our investigation is not about whether or not a crime was committed. Our investigation is about suitability for ministry and what ought to happen to the alleged perpetrator. But we fully cooperate with the civil authorities. What we want the church to be is a safe place. It's been a long time since we've had a fresh, new allegation against one of the priests in Wheeling, Charleston. Do we think it's working? Do we think we're doing it perfectly? By no means. Anyone who's ever dealt with this in any sector will know that this is a work in progress. You work at it and you try to get better and better at it. Nobody claims perfection here. Nobody.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the investigation of former Bishop Bransfield. As we mentioned earlier, initially centered on allegations of sexual harassment. In the end, the report you authorized to be sent to the Vatican found those allegations to be credible. You knew Michael Bransfield. You'd been his guest in Wheeling, spoke in Wheeling. You mentioned earlier you were sickened when you found out. Can you explain that a little more? I mean, what was your initial thought when the lay team brought the report back to you and you saw the findings?
I was really saddened. I've known the bishop a long time, but you know him on a friendly basis. You don't know these details. Certainly the harassment was new, the extent of the spending, all that was sad news to receive. But I tell you what I felt I had to do. I felt when I had firsthand information, factual information, the thing I had to do was immediately report it, which I did, to my ecclesiastical superiors, and did so within the same day as receiving those allegations, and in very short order, that information was received by my superiors in Rome, and shortly thereafter they appointed me to do an investigation. The investigation, so that was in August. I was authorized in September by the Holy See to do the investigation. As the Metropolitan Archbishop, I don't possess the authority to investigate on my own. I have to be authorized by the Holy See. But once I was, I said, you know, there's different ways I could do this. I could ask other bishops to do it with me and for me. I could do it myself. But I said, I don't have of myself the expertise I need to do a thorough job of this. And that's when I went to the 5 lay investigators, including a former state's attorney, including a forensic accountant, including a specialist in HR, and since it's a church investigation, a church law expert. And I said to them, no holds barred. Where does the truth lead? Tell us and bring back this report. And they spent 5 months doing it. They interviewed 40 people, if I'm not mistaken. As part of the process, they interviewed Bishop Bransfield, because if you're doing an investigation, you have to hear all sides. They compiled a very thorough report and submitted it to me in February of this present year. And the purpose of this, purpose of the report was not to report on all things wrong with the church. There's plenty to talk about there. Let's be clear. Purpose of this was a report authorized by the Holy See. I was charged to develop it and complete it and to give it back to the Holy See. It's theirs for the purpose of reaching decisions regarding the future of Bishop Bransfield. So that was the purpose of it. It was a fairly circumscribed purpose, but the report was complete and hard-hitting. It pulled no punches.
One of the things in the report that I found very interesting and had been reported on before are concerns that had followed Bishop Bransfield, sexual harassment concerns from his time in Philadelphia, also in Washington, D.C. when he was at the Shrine of the Basilica. It's got to be fairly obvious, I think, that there were some church leaders who were aware of these issues with him. And concerns have been raised. How did he, and I know this may be a question you can't answer directly, but these concerns were out there for a 15 to 20 year period. And yet in 2005, he was appointed as bishop in Wheeling, Charleston. How does that happen? I mean, how are the mechanics not there to prohibit that from happening?
Yeah. I'm not really sure. Church has a long history, 2,000-year history. And a lot of bishops have been appointed over 2,000 years. And it would have to be said, some appointments were better than others. Some should never have happened. And God bless us all. Sometimes great saints get appointed as bishops, and thank God that happens. I don't know. I wasn't privy to that. I was a bishop in Bridgeport at the time. There might have been people who knew all kinds of things. I truly wasn't one of them. I knew Michael on a friendly basis. We worked together on boards and things of that nature. And I regarded him as a friend, but I didn't regard myself as his closest friend by any means, or anybody who knew a lot of particular information. But I'll tell you what comes out of this for me. I think that it lays forth a challenge to the process of appointing bishops. Who is asked? How many people are asked? What state of life they are in? But by that I mean, are they priests, other bishops? Are we asking lay people who are in a position to know? We're not looking for hearsay. We're looking for direct information. In other words, do we put those appointments through a sufficient number of filters? While on the face of it, it generally works pretty well, because I know a lot of bishops. None of us are perfect, but I know a lot of bishops giving it the old college try. I among them. I think that this is an object lesson for us to go back and say, are we doing everything we should?
The young priests and seminarians in the Diocese of Wheeling, Charleston, who were interviewed and some interviewed and directly impacted by these allegations of sexual harassment. What do you say to them? You know, obviously, their leader, the man they look up to as their bishop in their diocese, was doing these things. How do you help them recover from it?
Sure. First of all, when they came forward, the first and most important thing I did, and I take no credit for this, sometimes the Holy Spirit just kicks you in the pants, and the Spirit did that to me that day. You just listen. You take it seriously. And they know, and I've seen this, I've had it happen to me, so I've gone to people and asked them to hear me out. And I know how much I appreciate it when they do. When someone's just willing to take you on your own terms, believe you, even though it was a colleague of mine. I listened thoroughly to what they had to say, listened actively, gave them as much time as they needed to tell their story, and then followed up. I think the fact that there was immediate follow-up said, okay, I believe you and I take you seriously. The other thing is been my ongoing contacts, periodic calls when I'm in town, visiting, just saying how you doing, providing also the kind of help that might be necessary, because if you've had this happen to you, it's not just a matter of telling one person one time. You have to kind of, you do have to deal with the longer term effects of that in your life, and I think we're trying to do that, but it's going to take time. It's going to take time.
There were three priests, close aides to Bishop Bransfield, Kevin Cork, Anthony Cincinnati, and Frederick Anning, that you reassigned from their administrative duties within the diocese and back into pastoral roles. Why were they reassigned? The report called for them to be reassigned just recently. You did that. What was the reasoning behind that?
First of all, I did make the reassignments. These are, any personnel decision you make is a complex reality. I just felt it was the right thing to do for everybody concerned, for the three priests themselves, for the good of the diocese, and for the good of the healing process. It seemed to me these difficult decisions were the right things to do. I probably would have assumed the new bishop would be doing these things for the most part, because most of us apostolic administrators are caretakers, but it seemed to be the right thing to do, and so that's why I did it. But
do you feel that once the report, information from the report came out in the Washington Post, that you needed to do it since they were publicly out there now, and again, from the standpoint of just confidence within the
simply the ability, it seemed to me the right thing to do at that time. Did it push up the timetable? Yeah. Would it have been done anyway? Yes.
Okay. So move on to the spending aspects of the report. Bishop Bransfield spent, according to the report, $2.4 million of diocesan funds on his personal travel, more than $4.5 million on his personal home, money on jewelry, disturbingly a lot of money on alcohol and some other things. What shocked you the most with the findings on the spending?
No one particular aspect of the spending bowled me over. It was the composite picture. The composite picture because of the stark contrast between the spending habits that emerged and the pastoral and social needs of the place he was serving in. It's even if you're serving in a wealthy area, there's no excuse. There's no excuse for any bishop anywhere to spend huge sums of money on himself. I think about the bishop in Germany, for example, who spent similarly. Pope Francis has called us to a very different reality, and rightly so. But the contrast with the poverty you see in the coal country and some of the isolated communities, or the unemployment, or the opioid crisis in the state of West Virginia, those resources need to go there. And so what this is like a huge wake-up call saying priorities have got to change. Have got to change. And I'd like to think here in Baltimore, I'm a poor city here, a poor city. And yeah, we have a beautiful basilica, and we have a big cathedral up the street, and we have schools and things. But I'd like to think we're trying to put the majority, the vast majority of our resources into Catholic charities, inner city schools, and things that serve the neediest and the most vulnerable, and good, ordinary church-going Catholics and almost church-going Catholics and former church-going Catholics in their pastoral needs. I'm not saying the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston hasn't done a lot. It does do a lot. There's a huge impact in what it does. But I think that the diversion of those resources from that mission is sad, because the diocese can and should do more.
The report sent to the Vatican removed the names of 11 priests, including yours. Received $350,000 in financial gifts from Bishop Bransfield, gifts that, in essence, later were repaid to him through diocesan funds. Just for the record, I know you've explained this, but why did you choose to withhold the names of those who received gifts and only address the issue publicly after the report was leaked?
Okay, so first of all, yes, I did address it, and I have said, in hindsight, it's a decision I'd do over. I've apologized, I've returned the money, and I hope we can move on from there. But that said, the report comes, the initial draft, and what we're looking at is compiling a report that is aimed at one thing and one thing only, which is to help the Holy See make a good decision, a fair decision with regard to Bishop Bransfield. And so the report, as initially drafted, only listed the bishops who had received gifts, not other people, including priests and lay people. And we ask ourselves, is this the right thing? Because some of those gifts that were given were legitimate. They were for travel. They were to support good works of the church in other places, which every diocese does. And some of them were honoraria. Others were gifts given in friendship, but there was no explanation. It looked like all these gifts were improper. And so, barring adding pages and pages to the report, we said, we'll deal with it generically. So it does say that cardinals and prominent bishops and other folks receive gifts, and we give the magnitude of the gifts that were given in the report. We just don't have the detail in there. Hindsight, I'd do it over. But it was not an attempt to obfuscate or to protect.
Or gifts such as that given by the former bishop in Wheeling, or from one priest to another, is that a common practice?
It happens now and again, I would say.
Some was for an apartment. He had given some money for one of the, I don't remember who it was now, to renovate his apartment in Rome.
That's fairly uncommon. Lord knows I can't give gifts like that here. I use every dime I got for the apostolate here in Baltimore. But to your earlier point, we also were unaware of the sources of these funds. But that having been said, it's fairly uncommon. I get gifts from bishops and priests. Mostly, I get poinsettias and Easter lilies, which I put on the altar. And the other thing I most commonly get are books on Franklin Roosevelt, because everybody knows that's my hobby. And every time I get a new book comes out, I usually get 2 or 3 copies of the same book. But we're friends, we're colleagues, we like each other, And so gifts of some sort are common enough among us, but never, even the things I got from Michael, never sense of quid pro quo. Never imagined he did that to get something out of me. Nor did he ask me for anything
Do you think that
like
was
that.
his intention?
No.
No.
Oh, I don't know what his intention was. All I know is he never asked me for anything in particular.
The process of grossing up, is that something that's a common practice that you've ever been aware of?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. And one last question on that. As you started your investigation and knowing you had received some financial gifts from him, did you ever look and think you may have had a conflict? Is that one of the reasons why you maybe didn't do it yourself?
No, no, I didn't. Maybe in hindsight, but the reason I didn't think it was a conflict was twofold. A, I didn't even avert to it. I didn't avert to it. That's not on my radar screen. I truly have to tell you that. Number two, I could never remember him asking an untoward favor from me over the years. Had he asked me to cover for him, or had he said, if you do this for me, I'll give you that? If I was a self-respecting bishop, if I did that, I would have resigned. But there was nothing like that. So I did not see then, and I do not see now, a conflict of interest. As you can see, it didn't prevent me from authorizing a no-holds-barred report.
Is Michael Bransfield still on the payroll of the Diocese of William Charleston in any fashion?
There's a pension plan,
Pension plan.
and it's like any other pension plan. You're as part of that.
I'm going to let you get into briefly. How much time do we have left?
For another 10 minutes.
Okay, I want to let you talk a little bit about some of the changes you want to make before we finish up.
Sure.
In the Wheeling area, particularly, there've been two schools that were closed that had strong pushback to the bishop. Given the spending, what do you say to those who are directly impacted, whether it be through opioid school closings, who could say now, geez, that $4.5 million you spent on your house might have kept us open for the next 50 years?
Well, first of all, again, untoward spending, no excuse. Put more resources toward the diocese, yes, in every case. But I've also been in the very difficult position of having to close schools. And I know firsthand that anytime that has to happen, alumni, current students, parents are upset. But sometimes, because of demographics, because of population shifts, because of the cost of tuition, a whole variety of factors, and through no one's fault, a school becomes simply non-sustainable. No bishop wants to close a school. I really hate to close. I'm much happier putting shovels in the ground and opening schools than closing them. But sometimes it becomes absolutely necessary. And I will also say that as much money as the bishop spent on himself, year over year, the diocese spent much more money to sustain its Catholic schools. In fact, the Diocese of Wheeling Charleston subsidizes its Catholic schools at a level that amazes me.
Right.
I couldn't possibly do it here. There's the resources to do it, and they do it. And so there are some very small schools kept in operation that amaze me, but they're in very remote places. There are no alternatives. And so that the diocese does it. But as St. Ignatius of Loyola said, the motto should be magis, which is the Latin word for more. The more a diocese can do to serve its people, the more resources you put toward the apostolate, the better.
You mentioned the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston is a wealthy diocese, have oil reserves in
Mhm.
Texas. So as part of this investigation, what recommendations or processes have you now put in place?
Mhm.
You mentioned earlier you've doubled the staff or the size of the finance board.
Mhm.
What's being done or has been done to make sure that
Mhm.
spending in the future, there's
Mhm.
some more accountability for how the next bishop
Mhm.
utilizes the diocesan funds?
Well, I think you might remember Bishop Schmidt.
Mhm, sure.
I knew Bishop Schmidt when I was much younger than I am now. Loved Bishop Schmidt. And a native of the state.
The native of Wheeling, actually.
And everybody loved the bishop. He was a wise fellow, very low key. One of the things I found, kind of looking under the hood, is that Bishop Schmidt had some pretty good policies in place. Now, they were a little dated because that was, he'd been out in 05, I think. It's a little bit dated, that's a while back, but pretty good. And so I said, we have a basis here, we have a baseline. Let's go back and ask ourselves what those were. Let's review them. Let's ask where we went off the track. Let's ask how we went off the track. And then let us ask, what do we need to do to strengthen those policies so that this form of malfeasance will never happen again? And so we're in the middle of it. It's a work in progress. And in fact, I'll be meeting with the Finance Council later this month for that express purpose. I have to say they've really, all of them, the new members and the old members, have risen to the occasion. They're a pleasure to work with. And my job, again, to go back to my earlier analogy, I'm doing the site work. I'm removing the rocks and the boulders and looking for the PCPs and the soil, trying to get that out so the new bishop can hit the ground running.
Do you expect, will you authorize the release of the unredacted version of the report?
Going back to what I said, the Holy See owns it. I don't. That said, when it was finished and I sent it to the Holy See, I did jawbone a little bit with the Holy See and said, I'd like to tell the good people of West Virginia as much as I can about this. So I said what I could, and they were pretty good. They gave me some leeway. Certainly, after a decision has been reached with regard to the bishop, there is information in that report. Some of it should not come out because innocent people would be harmed, and we can't do that. But on the other hand, there is information that, in my personal opinion, should come out because that level of transparency will help the healing process.
I know we're running short on time. Obviously, you've been at, you've given Mass at least 2 parishes in West Virginia since the report, since the information came out, I believe, Weirton and Martinsburg. What was your message to the faithful?
It was, first and foremost, the message of the gospel. When you go preach, when you go to say Mass and preach, you preach the gospel first and foremost. Secondly, it was one of simply solidarity with the people, good Catholics and other people in West Virginia of goodwill who are going through a difficult time. Thirdly, it was an admission, a very forthright admission of my own error in judgment. But most of all, it was words of encouragement. Because before the spring comes, you have to go through the storms. And I simply wanted to be with people, stand in the back of the church, unfiltered, let them know I was accompanying them, as the Pope likes to say, and give them a word of encouragement that there will indeed be a new and better day. And we're working toward that right now, in God's grace.
think I'm
Good.
good. I think I'm good.
Okay.
Perfect.
Unless you'd like to add something else that I didn't
I
think to
think
ask.
you were very complete.
Well, no, I think, I thought it was very good, and and I really appreciate your time.
You were very welcome.
Extremely much. Thank you so
Albert,
much, Archbishop.
What a pleasure. Thank you. Well, usually